Well, good day, everyone. I want to take a little bit of a hiatus from studying eschatology and the return of Jesus to some just good old biblical doctrine that's something that I've always asked over the years to Bible teachers and pastors, and never really got a good answer. And this stuff I want to talk about here is the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I want to just dig into who are they, and why does Jesus make this hard saying? Why does he refer to everybody else who's not part of the lost sheep of the house of Israel? Why are they the dogs? So let's go ahead and read some of the words of Jesus. And I have to admit, when you read this the first time, as a young kid in confirmation class, I read this. I'm thinking, what does this mean here? So let's go ahead and jump into Matthew 15. So Jesus was walking along with his disciples. And let me just remind you that his disciples were Jews from the house of Judah, from the southern tribe of Judah, as Jesus was. He's walking along with his disciples, and there's a woman, a Canaanite woman or a Syrophoenician woman, who is just yelling and screaming at her. And she says, "Have mercy on me, Lord, son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon possessed." But Jesus would not answer her, give her a word. And his disciples were saying to him, "Send her away, because she keeps shouting at us." And finally Jesus turned around and stopped and said to her, he said, "Look, I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came again and bowed down before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered her, "It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she said, "Lord, but even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from the master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done as you wish." And her daughter was healed at once. So, reading this over the years, how can this loving Jesus refer to everybody else who's not of the lost sheep of the house of Israel? Why are they dogs? Is that the way that you would think that this John 3:16 Jesus would talk? And it just doesn't sound like it. But maybe he was being facetious a little bit. But here is a woman whose daughter is just ravaged with demonic possession, and I don't think he was joking. I think he was serious when he said this. Okay. Another time in Matthew 10, Jesus sends out his 12 disciples. And 3 times in the New Testament, Jesus sends out disciples or followers. 2 of the times are the 12. So in Matthew 10 and Luke 9, he sends out the 12. So when he sends them out in Matthew 10, he calls all the disciples by name. He gathers them up and summons them. And then he gives them the instructions. He sends them out, the 12 out. He says, "Do not go the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter any city of the Samaritans, who are the half-breeds, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons." Okay, so the first charge that these 12 disciples get is to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Here we hear this again, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And then later in Luke 9, he sends out the 12 again, but this time he sends them out to everywhere, preaching the gospel and healing everywhere. So I don't want to get into a deep dive on Luke 9, but you can see from Matthew 10, he sends out the 12, and they're preaching the kingdom of heaven is at hand, not the gospel. And then in Luke 9, he sends them out everywhere to preach the gospel. It's just a little different. You can take a dive at that yourself to take a look at it. But here we go again, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. This doesn't make sense. Who is this group, the lost sheep of the house of Israel? Okay, so if you've been with me long enough here, you know that I like to talk about this subject right here, because this is the most confusing topic in all of Christianity about who we are as Christians and who the Jews are. Okay, so when the tribes split around 950 BC, when Solomon's son became king, they split into 2 groups, the southern tribe of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel, or Israel itself, led by Joseph and Ephraim. Ephraim was the lead tribe that led the 10 northern tribes, and Judah was in the south with the southern 2 tribes. And you can see when we'll get into Ezekiel 37, this dichotomy of these two tribes. This is so misunderstood in the church today. Even the Jews themselves, the modern day Jews, don't get this. I went to a synagogue a few weeks ago, and I just happened to make a comment that Joseph wasn't Jewish, and I had to get into an argument with this nice Jewish fellow that they're not. And finally he recognized, he said, yes, Joseph is an Israelite. I said, that's right, Joseph is not Jewish. He's of the northern tribe. He's like, yes. And he realized that neither is Joseph Jewish. Joshua's not Jewish. Noah wasn't Jewish. Abraham wasn't Jewish. A whole host of people in the Old Testament aren't Jewish. So just as a reminder here, after the kingdom split, the whole house of Israel was two kingdoms, the northern tribe of Israel and the southern tribe of Judah, like I just mentioned here. And this was how the land was divided up. You can see Israel was bigger than the southern kingdom of Judah. And around 722 BC, well, let me jump into this down here. So you can see this picture right here. This further describes what happened. This is the kings of ancient Israel, Israel and Judah. Where it starts off with Saul, David, Solomon, and then when we get to Solomon's son Rehoboam, who wanted to tax the northern 10 tribes, continually tax like his father Solomon did, they split in two. And we had Jeroboam became the king of ancient Israel. And Jeroboam was given that kingship from God himself. A prophet was sent to him, and he was told he would lead the 10 northern tribes, and that he would give Solomon's son the 2 tribes, so they could remain the covenant made with David, that out of the line of David would become a king, who Jesus became. And so this green line is the kings of Judah, and this red line are the kings of Israel. So I want to go back to what Jesus said. Let's look at what he said. I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, who is the house of Israel? The house of Israel are the northern tribes. Recall at the time of Jesus, as he said this, who was with him? The folks walking with him were his disciples who were from Judah. They were from the southern tribe. Now, why were they from the southern tribe? Because at the time that these two kingdoms existed, from 950 or whatever down to 722, in 722 BC, the northern kingdom was dispersed. They were invaded by the Assyrians, and they just went away. They were carried off, and they were assimilated into the Assyrian kingdom. A little different. A couple hundred years later than that, the house of Judah was taken into exile in Babylon, but they went as a group and came back 70 years later as a group to reestablish themselves in the land of Israel. But the northern kingdom never came back. They were permanently dispersed. That's the difference between the two sets of tribes. So by the time that Jesus came on the scene, he was sent for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, these guys. He wasn't sent for his first time for Judah. He said that. He knew that. Well, let's get into what happened now. Okay. If we go to Jeremiah 3, we see where this is played out in Jeremiah 3. I'm going to jump over here to Jeremiah 3. In Jeremiah 3, you see a conversation between God and the prophet Jeremiah. And it starts off talking about a man divorcing a wife. Well, when you get down in here to the details, you see that God is speaking to Jeremiah, and he says, God tells Jeremiah that he wrote a decree of divorce to the kingdom of Israel. Have you seen what that faithless, here this is God speaking, have you seen what she did, that faithless one, Israel, the northern tribe, how she went up on every high hill and upon every green tree and played the whore? And I thought after this that she would return to me, but she did not return. And then he said, God says, and did you see what that treacherous sister Judah did? So God's speaking of 2 wives. Like if Jacob had 2 wives, God had 2 wives, Israel and Judah. But look what God says. He says, I had sent her away, that's Israel, with a decree of divorce. He wrote her a decree of divorce, kicked her out of the house. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she went too and played the whore. But you'll notice when you read this, God did not write a decree of divorce for Judah. Judah was never kicked out of the house. See, what happens is we learn from Deuteronomy. Go back to my study. that if a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds out and the man finds no favor with her, then he can write a decree of divorce, and if she leaves the house, then she's divorced. So the northern kingdom of Israel was kicked out of the house. God divorced the northern kingdom. This is where it gets interesting. You have to follow me on this one. This explains the whole idea of the return of Jesus in 2 returns. Okay, so we learn from the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. We learn, it says, Paul speaks of, for I'm speaking to those who know the law. Paul obviously knew the law that is binding on a person as long as he lives. For a married woman is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. She is free from the law when the husband dies. So let's think about this for a minute. God divorced the northern kingdom, kicked them out of the land of Israel in 722 BC. He divorced her. She left. And at that point, she's not allowed to remarry unless the husband dies, the former husband dies. So what happened when Jesus came the first time? What did he come to do? When Jesus, God, died on the cross, it freed God's former wife, the northern kingdom of Israel, to become a bride again, to be able to remarry. That was the point of Jesus coming the first time. The lost sheep of the house of Israel was dispersed and needed to be released from the Mosaic law to allow that body of believers, that group, that promised group, to come back under a new covenant. So let's go back to the words of Jesus. But he said to the woman, he says, I was sent for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Okay, question. Were the Jews, the southern tribe of Judah, in the land of Israel at the time of Jesus, were they lost? No, they weren't. They were right there. Jesus was a Jew himself. They weren't lost. Was the northern kingdom of Israel lost at the time of Jesus? The answer is yes. So Jesus was sent the first time to die, thereby releasing the formerly divorced woman Israel from the Mosaic law, a covenant, to allow them to remarry God under a new covenant. So we read from Luke 22, verse 20. This is when Jesus poured, he says, this cup, this is the night before he betrayed. Jesus is speaking the Last Supper. He says, this cup of blood is poured out for you, is the new covenant in my blood. I mean, this act opened up the door to the world as well as the lost sheep of the house of Israel so they could become the bride of Christ. So these people, the lost sheep of the house of Israel, the former Israelites, they can now remarry under the new covenant. They couldn't do that before. So the question is, let's go back to the Mosaic covenant for the Jews. Does God ever go back on his promises? No. Is the Mosaic covenant been nullified? Has God voided the Mosaic covenant? No, he hasn't. So the conclusion is the modern day Jews of today are still married to God, the Father, through the Mosaic covenant. They don't need Jesus at this point. They're still under the law. It's a valid set of promises made on Mount Sinai 3,500 years ago. But when the wife, the children of Israel, 3,500 years ago, went into that covenant relationship with the Lord, with God, they split apart 500 years later, and those northern tribes, they went off and God divorced them. So Jesus had to come back and die, the former husband, to release them from the law, to allow them to remarry under the new covenant. That's the whole point of this old covenant versus new covenant, Jews versus Christians. Okay, I want to study something real quick here. Just talk about Ezekiel 37. For people that are still struggling with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, it's really right here. If you go to Ezekiel 37, it's all over the Old Testament. But this is an incredible thing to consider what's being spoken of here. This is Ezekiel 37, and it's called the stick. So look what it says. It's basically the prophet is being spoken to as being called the Son of Man from God. It says, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take a stick and write on it for Judah and the people of Israel associated with Judah. So one stick has Judah on it. Then another stick, write on it, for Joseph, the tribe of Joseph. And he calls it Joseph, the stick of Ephraim. And all of the house of Israel, the lost sheep of the house of Israel, associated with him. And join them together into one stick, that they may become one in your hand. And the people will say to you, will you not tell us what this means? Well, I'm telling you what this means today. You can see it, that at some point in the future, Jesus is going to take a stick and another stick and join the two together. What does that sound like? A stick plus another stick. What did he die on? He died on a cross, which is two sticks. So behold, the prophet is being told, behold, the prophet, I'm about to take the stick of Joseph that is in the hand of the United States, that's Ephraim, and all the tribes of Israel associated with him, that would be all the western tribes, all the Christian countries, and join it with the stick of Judah, that would be all the modern day Jews, and make them one stick in the hand of the Lord. That hasn't happened yet, because if you look in Ezekiel 37, there's the prophecy of the dry bones, and that's when a group of people are going to be resurrected. And you can see that when the prophet asks the Lord, who is this group, this mighty army? Read up here, this mighty army that comes to life. And God says that is the whole house of Israel, both sets of tribes connected together. That hasn't happened yet. There hasn't been this resurrection from the dead yet. But when that comes, and the Lord comes a second time, that's when he's going to combine these two covenants and bring the Jews and the Christians all under the same house, and will we once again be connected together. So there's another reference to Jesus that Jesus made about this one flock. So let me jump to John chapter 10, verse 15. And this is Jesus speaking. Jesus says, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, I will lay down my life for my sheep. And then Jesus tells his tribe of Judah, his Jewish brethren, right? Think about this. He's sitting here talking to his Jewish brethren, southern tribe of Jewish brethren, not Israelites, southern tribe of Jewish brethren. Jesus says, and I have other sheep that are not of this fold. So he would say, I have other sheep, that's the new bride that's coming, that are not of this existing fold of Jews and Judah, that I must bring them also. Bring them, that's bring the bride. You ever read Revelation 19 when the bride has made herself ready and when the Lord returns to kill the Antichrist and the false prophet? That's what he's talking about. When I bring them and they listen to my voice, my sheep hear my voice, so that there will be one flock and one shepherd. This is Jesus talking. Now we just read Ezekiel 37 a minute ago. And I showed you how at the end of it, after he takes those two sticks, the prophet says, God says, and I will make them one nation in my land in the mountains of Israel. And there will be one king over them all. And there shall be no longer two nations, no longer divided into two kingdoms. There will be one kingdom. So you can see this word in John 10 brings both of these together, and there's a reference to the bride, to the northern tribes. That's what this bride is. The bride is the northern tribes, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that's why Jesus came the first time, because he came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I know I'm being repetitive, but I'm trying to explain this concept. Okay. All right, so where do we see this new covenant? We know the new covenant's in Luke, the Last Supper, but it's also in Jeremiah 31. And Jeremiah 31:31 says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Well, it turns out that the house of Israel got into this covenant ahead of time, ahead of the house of Judah. Okay, so we want to conclude here real quick. So who are the lost sheep of the house of Israel? They are not the Jews. So the lost sheep of the house of Israel is the former wife of God that became married to God on Mount Sinai 3,500 years ago. But this wife, former wife, was divorced. God came and died released her from the law so she could become the new bride to Jesus, the bride of Christ. So if you want to trick your pastor, study this, print this out, and go to him and ask him about these dogs. Say, Pastor, what does this mean? Are we all dogs? And who is this lost sheep of the house of Israel? See if he can give you an answer. I bet he can't. Then ask your pastor this. Say, Pastor, if a Jew doesn't profess the name of Jesus before that Jew dies, is that Jew going to go to hell? And see what he says. He'll squirm. He won't be able to tell you. He won't give you a clear answer. The question is, does God go back on his promises? Would he do that? Is the Mosaic law still in effect? The answer is yes. But the Jews won't need Jesus until the Antichrist comes and puts his yoke around them and makes their life terrible. Then they will be crying out for their Messiah, who happens to be our Savior, their Messiah. And he will come and save them from the Assyrian, the Antichrist. All right, guys. With that, have a good day, and God bless you.